This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to the Next Man Up,
part of the NRT Podcast Network.
Gentlemen, welcome in once again to the Next Man Up podcast. So good to have you along for another episode and to be back in the saddle as your host. Thank you for changing the world by being and raising a healthy and godly man. In this episode, we're going to continue this theme, this series, if you will, on the essential qualities of manhood. And we're going to look at what love is and what love looks like. Now, if you haven't listened to the previous episodes on the Essentials of Manhood series, you can search for that phrase, Essentials of Manhood, on our website, thenextmanup.com/blog, to find the whole series, both the audio to date. There's one more episode that we'll do next week to wrap up the series, and the written articles that we've released over the last number of months. Once again, you can find it all on thenextmanup.com/blog. And the focus here is really helping you and your son really understand what it means to be a man. Bigger, broader, more accurate from the definitions and really, quite honestly, the confusion we get from the world around us. So we're going to be leaning into love today and honestly just scratching the surface. But that's where we're going for this episode. So when you think about love from the perspective of society, from the angle at which society defines this term, what you find is it's really feelings. And more specifically, it's really sexual feelings. But the reality is this, you guys know this, love is not just a noun. Now, I know you didn't join the Next Man Up podcast today for an English lesson, but trust me, this is relevant. Love is more than a noun. It's more than an emotion. In fact, it's more broadly defined, I think, as a verb, as an act of the will. DC Talk back in the day, some of you are old enough to remember that group, sang the song Love is a Verb. It's a moving to action, or think of it this way, a resolve to care for and pursue the well-being of someone. And when you think about the word in that context, the application extends well beyond what happens in the bedroom. And I think it's important to help your son see that love is more than sex. It's more than romantic feelings. It's certainly more than what pop culture displays. In fact, it's a way of being. And in this series, we've talked about other qualities like strength and honor and leadership, other ways of being. But at the root of this really is an underlying motive of love. Behind everything we do, it's living out of love. Now, as you know, there are a number of different ways we could go with this idea of love. But let me focus on just 3 ways that you can model for and teach your boy how to engage with love beyond the romance, beyond the sexual, to engage with love as a verb. The first is this: loving yourself. Now, you may be scratching your head a little bit. What I don't mean is selfishness or vanity or narcissism. What I'm talking about here is love in this idea of caring for and pursuing the well-being of yourself, doing the work to grow or to heal or to reconcile with your past. This is all part of becoming healthy and to see yourself as Father God sees you. Now, this may be harder than it at first seems, especially with things in your past, whether it's decisions or circumstances, things that have happened to you, things that you have done, those things that you don't like about your past. But it's been said in various ways by different folks, this idea that you love others at the level at which you love yourself. So if you are going to be able to love others well, which we'll get to in the second and third points here, you got to start by loving yourself well first. In other words, like you always hear on the airline, on the flight, before the plane takes off, put on your own oxygen mask first. And here's a way that you can start. Start by accepting that Father God loves you, regardless. He can't love you anymore. He won't love you any less. He loves you for who you are and the creation that you are to him. If you can start there, that's a great place from which to learn how to love yourself. The second focus here is loving your family. Now, you know this. Our first experiences as kids are with family. It's our first pack, our tribe, if you will. And the reality is we don't get a choice. We don't get to choose which family we're born into. It just happens, and it's the family that we're given. However, as you grow up and begin your own family, or as your son grows up and begins his own family down the road, your tribe changes and it expands. And this time you get to choose. You get to choose at least your partner, your spouse in the endeavor. You don't get to choose your kids, but you can choose to have children and to grow your family that way. And so, of course, it would make sense that we're talking about loving your family. This is obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean that it's easy. If you're married now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've been married in the past, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Loving your family is important and it's critical, but it's not always easy. And regardless of where you are in loving your family, there is always room to improve. But I bet you have a sense for how well you're doing now. If not, perhaps you can ask these questions. How are you doing loving your wife? Or do your words and your actions communicate love to your kids? You see, there's probably no greater gift a man can give than to love his family well. And when you do this, the ripple effect is huge. Not only are you giving your kids that first experience of being in a family, in a tribe, you're giving them that solid foundation. You're also investing in your spouse, your wife, your partner here. And you're showing your son how to do this. So when it's time for him to build his family and to love his family, he will know how to do it because he's already seen it done at home. This is how you multiply your gift of loving your family into the next generation. Okay, so loving yourself first, loving your family, number 2. Now we get a little bit harder and we talk about loving your neighbor. Now, if you're at all like me, it's tempting to want to ask, who is my neighbor? If we could define who our neighbor is, then it makes it easier because, well, we can disqualify some folks, or we can exempt others from our responsibility of loving them. But if you read the New Testament carefully and you examine the discussion that Jesus and his disciples had, what you find is that neighbor really means everybody. Now, one of the things that has helped me is love doesn't have to mean like or enjoy spending time with. At least that's how I think about it today. But it does mean to care for and pursue the well-being of someone else, of your neighbor. You know, some people are easy to love because they treat us well, or they love us back, or they're not unkind to us. Others are just much harder to love. I recently had an encounter with someone who really, really tested my patience. In fact, if I could have defined in the moment what it meant to be a neighbor and been able to exclude her from that definition and therefore exempt her from my responsibility to be loving, I would have. I was slandered. I was lied to. I was personally attacked. I was vilified unjustly. This is the most hot I've been at a single person in a very, very long time. And I'm telling you, I did not want to love this person. I certainly did not like her in the moment. And yet, back to our definition of love, an act of the will pursuing the well-being of someone else, regardless of how I was treated in that moment, it was my responsibility to pursue her well-being, even if she couldn't see that's what I was trying to do. She was so angry. She couldn't see it. And yet, I focused on doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Now, that's probably a mild story compared to what some of you have had to deal with. Having to overcome neglect or abuse or trauma. In order to love, you've got to get over these negative things that have happened in your past, perhaps by family, certainly by quote unquote neighbors in your life that should have treated you better. And yet, when we're able to work through that, to heal and to let go, to begin to love ourselves in spite of those things that have happened, when we do that, we can get a glimpse of the heart of Jesus and what it was like for him to bear the cross and to bear the shame and to bear the attack and the abuse, all to demonstrate how much he loved us. Now, guys, don't hear this as I've got it always and all figured out. But I do believe that the love that we're talking about here, defining everybody else as neighbor, is the standard. And yes, this is a hard one. But as a reminder, here's what Jesus said. He said, you're familiar with the old written law, love your friend, and its unwritten companion, hate your enemy. I'm challenging that. I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anyone can do that. Now, that's the Message translation, but I think it captures so well in common language the standard by which we're called to love. Loving ourselves, loving our families, and yes, even loving our enemies. Well, as I said, there's so much that can be said about love. We're really only scratching the surface. This one English word with such depth of meaning. And maybe we'll come back to this down the road in a future episode. But for now, as we land the plane, let me give you a few questions to ponder. First is this: where is your understanding of love too small? Or this: where has your practice of love become too easy? And finally, for you fathers, as a father, how can you help your son see love in a bigger light? Okay, well, as I said, one more to go in this Essentials of Manhood series. Today is episode 199. Our next one will be episode 200, and we'll be talking about the last quality of manhood in this series, which is faith. I hope you come back for that one. You know the drill by now. Same bat time, same bat channel next week. Until then, adios. Hey listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. You know, we would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback at thenextmanup.com. That's feedback at thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.